Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wondered why you're so sensitive and how in the world to navigate this world, then do we have the Evolutionary Empath show for you. Today I'll be talking with Reverend Stephanie Redfeather, PhD, founder and director of the Blue Star Temple, an expert on empaths, and the author of a brilliant must-read for anyone who's attracted to this show or with a highly sensitive child or married. My wife calls it the Handbook to the Pookie, the Evolutionary Empath. And that's just what I want to talk with her about today, about how to know if you're an empath and live a heart-centered life. That plus we'll talk about monkeys and morphic fields, corn and potatoes, Peruvian altars, pre-quake tremors and the fires of Kali, oh boy, Yuga cycles and the great years, Pachacuti and world reversals, home anchors and blue-eyed Susans, make that black-eyed Susans, and what in the world Windows and drooling has to do with anything. Gotcha. So welcome to the show, Stephanie. Are you ready to shine?
I am. Thank you, Michael.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for being here this morning, because this is a very early morning interview. So thanks so much for doing that. Today we're going to talk briefly about your story, then how to tell if you're an empath, and then how to navigate the world as a highly sensitive being. But before we do that, what's one simple clue that can tell us if we are or if someone we know might be an empath?
One of the most common characteristics, if you will, is it's easy for us to take on other people's emotions, take on other people's stuff, their problems, and think they are our own. And so it's a product of our ability to blend and merge with others.
Okay, and if we then look at that, is that a challenge that you had blending and merging with others since your earliest years?
Oh, yes. Most definitely.
What did that look like? And forgive me, there's an incident at 8 running around the house with a knife, perhaps.
Yeah, somewhere in that age. What I realized was when you're born with this kind of sensitivity, when you're born with the ability to blend and merge, you don't know that there's another way. And so you feel everybody else's stuff, you pick up on their emotions, you take them on as your own, and you don't know that those aren't yours because you've never had a different experience of it. And I just remember there was one time around 8 years old where I just had so much anger and frustration and intense energy moving through me, and I was home alone. I didn't have bad parents. I was home alone for a short period of time, I know, but I just grabbed a knife and was running around the house, and I know I wasn't going to use it on myself, and I wasn't going to, tear up furniture, but I didn't know what to do with everything I was feeling. It was intense, and it was incredibly overwhelming and exhausting.
I had what I called blow-ups, where I would just melt down. In fact, I was the kid who everybody loved to bully because I couldn't handle the energy around me. And so if they picked on me, I would lose it, and then I would get pummeled, and I would think there's just something wrong with me. Everybody else gets something that I'm not getting.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not the case, is it?
Right. It's not.
So then, you went from there. Actually, what's fascinating to me, if we go forward in your childhood, is you're dancing, you're acting, you're doing all these creative endeavors, and then some switch flipped in you, and you chose the dark side. What happened, Stephanie?
Yeah, I was a very intuitive, creative child. I went to a creative and performing arts school, kind of like the TV show Fame, if anybody remembers that. And my parents divorced when I was 8 and 9. And so I was living with my mom, visiting my dad and stepmom during summer and Christmas. And with all the wisdom of a 13-year-old, I decided that for high school, I wanted to go live with my dad and stepmom. And so that became a reality. And at 13, you just don't get all of the markers and the context clues. You don't have the ability to make good decisions taking in all of the factors. And so what I didn't realize, one, was that living with them was different than visiting.
Yes.
And my stepmom and I had some serious karma, and she was very emotionally and mentally abusive. And so I moved there just naively assuming that we would find a dance studio and they would pay for lessons and all of this stuff, and none of that happened. And so the way I describe it is that my feminine side started feeling unsafe in the world. And so my masculine, to the best of his ability, came in and said, "I'll save you," and took her and put her in a box and put her away for safekeeping. And so you can go ahead. I can see you.
Well, if I put on my coach's hat for a second, and I look at a higher perspective of this, and I'm guessing you've done this too. There was a part of you, we can call it soul, we can call it source, we can call it whatever, that actually maybe chose this for your highest good, to rip the carpet out from underneath you. I mean, you actually went forward with your masculine side all the way into the Air Force to bring you so far to the other side, this collective amnesia, we can call it, that we get here, to help you really bring you back to center and understand who you are after torturing the hell out of you.
Yeah. Yes. And it's, that's one of the wonderful things about getting older, is you have the perspective to see how all of these seemingly disparate aspects of your life really played together in this beautiful tapestry. And that's just what happened in high school. I mean, you can practically chart the feminine going down, the masculine going up. And by the time it was time for me to make decisions about what I was going to do afterwards, I choose to get a math degree and become an Air Force officer.
So, and you were an Air Force officer, if I have it right, for about 5 years. You get out, you try to start your own business. I'll use the word try. Yoda says there is no try. But you did try to start your own business for five and a half months before, you call it the pre-quake tremors. Everything that you stuffed down, I'm guessing, started to come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was actually in for 10. Okay. And when it was time to get out, it wasn't a matter of, I know what I want to do next. It's time to get out. It was, I think it's time to get out. What am I going to do next? And started my own financial planning business and quit after 5.5 months because I hated it. And the pre-quake tremors were really just, okay, something inside me is telling me I need a shift. Something needs to change. Whatever that was told me it was time to get out of the Air Force. I tried this business. Clearly, that was not what I was supposed to do. So it was kind of all of these rumblings, and then just the full-on earthquake hit and launched me into a 5-year period that I call being in the spiritual crucible, which was like living 100 years in the space of 5. I just went through so much intense transformation.
Well, that is the shamanic journey of being completely broken down, burned, dismembered, dying while you're still alive in order to come back anew.
Absolutely.
How did you become Red Feather?
I have they don't live in Kansas City anymore, but one of my mentors and her husband were huge in the community in terms of offering drumming circles and, shamanic work and women's empowerment and a lot of different things. And so I was doing a healing session with him, and I was standing on a buffalo hide facing east, and I had my eyes closed. He's taking me through a process, and all of a sudden I'm having a vision. And I'm seeing all of these different things, and directly in front of me is a Native American with a full length headdress, but all of the feathers were red. And I realized, oh my God! And I said, Gary, I think I'm being given a name. And so I told him, and he tuned into his guide. He's like, yes. And so we did this naming ceremony. And so for a number of years, that was my spirit name. And when I got married, I took it on as my legal last name.
Awesome. So let's go from there. We're going to talk about the 5 distinct qualities to tell for an empath. First off, what is an empath?
Yes. Well, I wish I had a short answer. What I can tell you is that when I started writing this book, my spirit guides only gave me one directive, and that was create a definition. So I was like, okay, yeah, no pressure there. So as I started sitting with the information that I had, I've done empath workshops for a long time, and I gathered up that information as a place to start, and the data started rearranging itself, and um, they coalesced into what I call these 5 characteristics of an empath. And then, in addition to that, I actually created a definition, a proper definition, if you will. It's like a paragraph long because there's just so many components to it that I can't just, the shorthand version of what is an empath is a highly sensitive person, and that so doesn't get it for me. So do you want me to cover the 5 qualities, or where would you like
Absolutely,
me to?
because I want people today to be able to check out the show. And my guess is if they're listening that they have qualities of an empath to be tuning into our show. But I want them to get a good idea of, oh, this is me, or, oh, this is someone I love, or, oh, this is my daughter or son.
For sure. Yeah. Well, the first quality is our ability to merge with and absorb the energy of other life forces. So not just humans, but animals, plants, everything that's sentient. And this quality stems from our highly open energy field that we're born with. The second quality is a highly sensitive nervous system. So obviously this is the quality that makes us very prone to overstimulation and overwhelm, which requires extra vigilant self-care on our part. The third quality is sensitivity to energies around us and the ability to perceive and access energy from all of these subtle fields that surround life forms. And so this is the quality that makes it easy for us to see the dead or apparitions, or tune into the Akashic records, or have shamanic journeys, or communicate with animals, or be a medium, and all of those sorts of things. The fourth quality is the premium that we place on peace and harmony. And that's peace and harmony in our own self, in our own energy field, but it's also in our environment and in our relationships. And so when unconscious, this is the quality that will tend to make us doormats, where we don't want to rock the boat, we don't want to do anything to upset somebody else. So we try to keep everything as calm and stress-free as possible.
My wife would call this the eggshell quality. Walking around on eggshells so that you don't upset anyone or anything and throw the energy even more out of harmony.
Yeah, yes, for sure. The fifth quality is our big open hearts and a desire to serve. And so, so many of the people in my empath tribe, if you will, are massage therapists, energy healers, hospice workers, therapists, people in very clear professions of service. But there are also people who are computer programmers and bankers and engineers and, that sort of thing. I mean, obviously I got a math degree and went into the Air Force, so, but what happens when this quality is unconscious is we tend to put everybody else first and put ourselves last.
And so, okay, so this kind of gives us an idea, and we become really sensitive to things. Actually, one of the more interesting symptoms, signs, I don't know what we call it, is an empath's, we'll have to bleep this here, but shitometer.
Yes. And, I keep using the term unconscious because we're unaware that we're an empath until we're aware. And when we're unaware, those are the unconscious years where we tend to live from the shadow aspect of these qualities. And so because we're so highly sensitive and tuned into other people, we're able, if all of those connections are intact, if we know how to listen to them and understand the data that we're receiving, if you will, through all of our receptors, then, we can just look around a room and go, it's like, okay, BS, not true. You're lying. You're, not to be accusatory. I mean, obviously, we all have our, coping mechanisms and all of those sorts of things that we run. But we can sense the dissonance between a person's authentic self and what they're presenting.
It's fascinating. I've had guests on the show who are CIA agents and FBI agents and all up and down the spy line. And rather than being a very young, male-oriented person, they're very empathic. They're able to tune in to others and really befriend others and understand them at a deep level. And I had no idea, I hadn't really thought about it as they're operating from their empathic side.
Hmm. Yeah, and what a fascinating career to have those awarenesses and to operate in that world.
Yeah, and what they would say if I had them on right now talking with you is that's what keeps them alive.
Mm. Hmm.
So, on that note, speaking about alive, you said live from the shadow aspect. What does that mean?
What that means, that the simple definition of the shadow is the unloved, disowned parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
So these are aspects that we're unaware of. They're still a part of us. We just don't acknowledge them, or we don't recognize that they are there. And so as empaths, with this amazing ability to blend and merge with other people, take on their emotions, sense all of these other things, when we don't recognize that's what's happening, then we are unconsciously merging with other people, which can lead to experiences of codependence
Mhm.
and feeling responsible for everybody else's stuff and losing ourselves in relationship and not knowing where we end and the next person begins, and overgiving to the point of having nothing left in the tank, et cetera, et cetera.
And we may dive into some more of those in a minute. I want to go from there, and we'll probably double back to some of the strengths of an empath and some of the challenges. But I want to talk about what's going on in the evolution of our species. I mean, you call it the evolutionary empath. Are more empaths coming into the world today than ever? And if so, why?
Yes. And there's trying to figure out how much detail to go into here.
Well, we can talk
The-
about procession real
okay.
generally speaking.
Okay. Okay.
I groove on this one, and Graham Hancock and the temples
Yes.
and the stars. So go for it.
Okay. We are in a grand cycle of time that a lot of people maybe aren't aware of or haven't heard of. The most common term for this is called the Great Year. It's a 24,000 year cycle. Some people say it's 26,000. There's reasons for this discrepancy. I use the 24,000 year model that basically says for 12,000 years we are ascending in consciousness, and then for the next 12,000 years we're descending in consciousness. And it is based in a celestial motion, an observable fact, if you will, a thing called the precession of the equinoxes. And so there's quite a bit of science. For some people, their eyes might be glazing over at this point, but we're familiar with the 12 zodiacal constellations,
Yeah.
and they are in the sky. And if we were able to just stand on a certain point on the earth for 24,000 years, we would see all 12 constellations rotating, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and essentially 2,000 years in each constellation, and then it moves to the next one, and it's called precession because they move from right to left as we view them from the earth. And this is a cycle, a phenomenon that has been documented in over 30 ancient cultures. So this is not a theory. This is something that is observable. What is theory, if you will, is why that happens. And I think that's kind of beyond the scope of the conversation today. And I do go into that in my book a little bit. But it creates this cycle. And there are some other terms that the listeners might have heard of. So if you've heard of the Greek ages, the Iron Age, Bronze Age, Silver Age, Golden Age, there's also the Indian yugas. And I've just forgotten the order: Treta Yuga, Satya Yuga, these 4 different yugas, and they align precisely with the ages. And so,
And that's a cool point to point out, is that you've got
mhm,
two very distinct cultures at different time periods on the earth who have the same cycles
mhm,
lined out that match identically.
yes, yes. And so, as part of the descension, so we're in the height of the golden age where we're essentially one with all of creation. We understand ourselves as creators, as God selves. We understand all of these subtle workings of the universe and time travel and cosmic star relationships and all of this sort of thing.
And
As
that's
we
not us now.
correct. And as we descend, what happens is we drop in vibration. We start to lose this information. We start to doubt this information. Our values change, and so it is difficult to precisely nail, if you will, here's exactly when this age began, or here's exactly when this cycle began, because that information has been lost, it's been destroyed. To the best of our ability to gather this data and come up with a general idea of where we are out of the Iron Age and several hundred years into the Bronze Age. So we are definitely on the upswing. We are ascending. We are raising in vibration. Time is speeding up. We talk about this phenomenon of time speeding up and consciousness raising. And so empaths are here on purpose because it's time for us again.
I'm going to see if I can do a little summary of this.
Yeah,
So
please.
24,000 year cycle. There's 12,000 years that you descend as humanity, that you get, I call it dumber. Basically, we forget who we are. We become less attached to, less embodied, shall we say. And then at the bottom of 12,000 years, we start the uptick again. And so we have these giant cycles. So we can look at megaliths around the earth, for instance, and we go, how the heck did they move the stones or get this amount of precision? Because we think linear, well, those were less evolved civilizations than us, but that may not be the case. And I'll go just a little bit into one of the theories, which is that if I get it right, our solar system or galaxy is spinning around another. And we're doing this cosmic dance, and at some point we get really close. That's when we're ascending. The energy is really fast. At some points we get really far, things slow down. And I look biologically, and I look at the size maybe of a fern leaf or the size of an animal. Last night I was reading about caves where they found 10-foot deer remains in caves, that everything accelerates at these points and grows faster and larger. And we are in the uptick. We hit the bottom of this 12,000 year cycle. And now we're finally coming back around. And as we're starting to become more sensitive, the empaths come in as wayfarers to lead the way. Does that sound right?
Yes. Yes. And I speak about the morphic field of the empath in the book, which I consider just, kind of a repository of empathic intelligence. And every living thing has a morphic field. So I just think of it as, what we knew, how we lived, what we understood as humans didn't go away forever and dissipate into the ethers. I think of it as just being stored for us in this living field of intelligence that was just waiting for us to swing back around again, to be at a point in our consciousness and vibration and awareness to be able to access that information, for it to be time for those records, if you will, for that wisdom to open back up to us. And so the morphic field of the empath has just been holding in trust this information, this wisdom. And I believe that I call it the evolutionary empath, because I believe every empath that's here is to help collectively move humanity through this period of ascension. We come here with a slightly different energetic physiology. We have different sensitivities. I like to think that at some point in the future, empath isn't even going to be a thing, because it'll just be the air that we breathe.
And it's something that I am training people with today, the concept of being an open-hearted warrior, of the masculine yang, push forward, stoicism, no pain, no gain, must martyr ourselves. That time period is done. We get to be in a more balanced masculine and feminine, drop our shields, take in these emotions. But it's scary if we don't know what's going on, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's terrifying.
So what are some of the common, you mentioned a few of them earlier, what are some of the common challenges of an empath and then some of the special qualities of an
hmm
empath?
hmm Yeah, the challenge is it just really depends on where you land on those five qualities. So it's a sliding scale.
Yep.
It doesn't mean you have to have all five or at a certain marker. But codependence, so I mentioned some of these before. Going into our relationships, feeling responsible for the other person, taking on their emotions, feeling them for them, taking on their problems, feeling like we have to solve the problems for them, not being able to stand up for ourselves, not being able to ask for what we need. And sometimes that goes back to can't even recognize what we need because we're so other identified. It's like we've abdicated our own throne. We've picked ourselves up and plopped ourselves inside the other person, dropped our anchor there, and are so other identified that we don't even know who we are. I have clients and friends, and I've got a couple of interviews that I put in the book where they would take on their partner's habits, their values, their hobbies. Like they didn't even realize until they got out of the relationship. They're like, I didn't even like to do that. I didn't even like to eat that kind of food. I didn't even whatever, but they didn't know that about themselves.
It reminds me of Runaway Bride, and in which Julia,
Roberts.
thank you, Julia Roberts is taking on the eggs. Whatever eggs she is, the guy that she's engaged to, those become her favorite eggs. She doesn't know who she is or even what food she likes to eat.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And, then again, if we're unconscious, we're almost always in some sort of overwhelm, completely overstimulated, and maybe we don't even recognize the adjustments we need to make in our environment or our workspace to mitigate those things. We don't understand self-care and how important that is. And so we're just like running roughshod over our own nervous system, not even recognizing we have control over what we expose ourselves to. For those who are really identified with giving, like their self-worth is tied to, and their sense of identity is tied to that, they give and give and give until they have nothing left in their tank. So those are just a handful of examples.
Thank you. And then we'll go to the positives. I've had on in the past, and we're going to have her back on, Dr. Christian Northrup talking about energy vampires. And it sounds like an empath is like the perfect gift waiting to happen for somebody who wants to be a Hoover for somebody else's energy.
Yes. That is one of the things that we have to watch out for, because if we're unconscious and people recognize this aspect, they're going to be like, oh, I'm going to go dump on Stephanie, or I'm just going to go in there and go, and then the person leaves your office and you're like, or you just feel completely spent. So yes, I have firsthand experience with that phenomenon. So gifts, again, there is a progression here where, this is just kind of the way it is right now with where we are in human development. If you don't know you're an empath, you're living as an unconscious empath. You're probably living from the shadow aspects, and you're probably relating to these qualities as a liability instead of an asset. And once you can come into consciousness with them and start to understand them, then that attitude can shift and you can begin to see those qualities as an asset and learn to apply them, know when, the measure, like when to apply, when to back off, when to draw a boundary, so that these qualities can start to work for you, if you will, instead of against you. And so this ability to blend and merge, to feel other people's emotions, not to just be sympathetic, like, oh, I can imagine what that's like, but the ability to just drop ourselves inside another person's shoes
Mhm.
makes us excellent. Like our superpower is compassion, and we are excellent at negotiating,
Mhm.
mediating, listening, understanding somebody else's point of view. So those are all fabulous qualities to have. Our sensitivities, when properly, aligned and calibrated,
Yeah.
can be our navigation system.
Mhm.
They can help give us signals like, that doesn't feel good. I don't think I better, like we just get these intuitive hits. I was going to go do this today, but something says don't do that. Or, you know what? So and so popped into consciousness. I'm going to give her a call. You call, oh my God, her mom just died. Like there's, all of these ways in which these sensitivities, I mean, really, that is our natural way as humans to navigate life. But we've been taught otherwise, and we disconnected or shut off all of those sensors and communication systems. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask, do our sensitivities increase during our lifetime, or as we become more aware of it, we just learn how to use it better?
I would say we learn how to use it better. I don't know that they increase. But what I can tell you is that, just like when I was speaking about the shadow, when it's something that let's say that you got messages as a child that, boys aren't supposed to cry or buck up, or, your skin is too thin, and, whatever those messages are, that causes us to put up walls or to snip off those internal communication systems and shove those qualities underground. They don't go away when we shove them underground. They are still there. They're still a part of us, and they are still and always seeking expression. And so it's not that we get more sensitive. It's just that when we can invite that aspect of ourselves back into the fold, back into awareness and wholeness, then we can start to consciously work with them.
Very, very cool. Let's go from there and let's talk about some ways that we can, I'm going to call them antidotes. It's not a fair term, but ways that we can use this for our benefit, or at least, excuse me, protect our energy and establish some boundaries here. And I want to start with, we'll go through these 5 qualities, and maybe you can give us some ideas with each one. First off, our ability to merge with and absorb the energy of other beings. And I'm curious what happened when you were stationed in Saudi.
Oh. I was 25, and that would be stressful for anybody. So I understand there's already a stress level there. But being an empath and not knowing it, I'm in a country that is hostile towards women, or at least not favorable. So I'm picking up on that energy.
Mhm.
They would not, the Saudi military, whenever they had to engage with us, would only engage with the men. Women couldn't drive. There are all of these other rules that we had to respect in their culture. But I was also sensitive to just the tensions of what was going on. I was feeling everybody else's stress. And I had several experiences I'd never had before. My gums started to bleed, which I think was just a stress response. I had all of these weird little things happening. And I remember on the one hand, I was so connected to the work because I knew exactly who it was for, why it was important, what was going to happen if I didn't do it. It felt purposeful. And then I would go home at night and cry so hard that my throat would swell up and I couldn't breathe, because I was so emotional and just lost and had no tools for managing that. And the military is not well known for having good skill sets in that area, or people to, like I even went to the chaplain, and even then I remember thinking at 25, well, you're useless.
Cool.
So
Chaplain's probably going, I'm going through the same thing. I just don't even realize it myself. That's why I was drawn to be a chaplain. How do we handle our ability to merge?
I wish it was a simple answer. It is a process. It is always a process. No matter what you learn or establish or practice, there's always more. There's always the next level of growth. But what is so important for an empath to work with and recognize is our edges. There's something I want to say here that provides a really important concept or perspective. And one of my mentors said one time, "You and I are one, but we are not the same." And it points to the fact that we are both human and divine, so in spirit form, we're all made of the same God stuff. We are all one. We are all connected. But the truth of it is, in 3D human reality embodied in this meat sack, we are different. We have different qualities, different values, different likes and dislikes, and we each have the right to occupy our own sovereign space. And there is a distinction between you and I, and that is not bad. It's just a differentiation. It's a distinction. And so for some empaths, they don't even consider this idea of a boundary, of an energy container. So that is really the first skill, if you will, that I would encourage people to develop, is to get in touch with, to just visualize it. What are my edges? And then there's a lot of different places to go with it, tuning into what experiences throughout the day decimate your container, or, does it look like Swiss cheese? I go through a whole section in the book where I talk about energy leaks and examples of it, blowout leaks and cave-in leaks and all of that kind of stuff. There's so much to it, but I don't want people to feel overwhelmed by saying this, because it is a journey, and it's like learning to walk. You didn't just stand up and start walking. You fell down a lot, but you kept trying.
Thank you. I want to talk now about our highly sensitive nervous systems. And one time that I fell down and I guess kept trying, I was invited years ago to like a Friday night kirtan. All these people stuffed in a tiny room, singing, swaying, all of this energy swirling around, and then people started dancing. And one woman was very angry, you could tell, and started, I'm sitting and trying to meditate, slamming into me. And all of a sudden I had to run out and found myself uncontrollably crying. And I could not go back in. How do we work when we're picking up on everybody else's energies, when we're tuning in? How do we start to protect ourselves?
Yeah. It all goes back to that energy boundary, recognizing that it's there. And, there are all different manner of ways that we can clear our energy field and maintain its integrity. So especially in public, what I invite people to do is, our energy field expands and contracts. We talk about it as a finite thing. Technically, it's an infinite thing, but it helps for the purpose of discussion to think of it as finite. To draw it in a little tighter, a little bit closer to the body, if that feels good to you when you're out in public, so you can feel a little bit more contained. You can also play with the shape of it. I have a friend who talks about the cow catcher on the front of a train, where if you've got some really intense energy coming at you, you just kind of shape your energy field so that it just deflects down either side. One of the shamanic techniques that I learned is to just take a couple of fingers and kind of point it at the earth. And so like you're a grounding rod or a lightning rod, where you're just letting it pass through you or bounce off of you. So there's a lot of different techniques that you can use, but conscious awareness is the most important thing, especially if you can gird up before you go to the event. And then while it's happening, every once in a while, you got to take some deep breaths, or maybe visualize your container, do a little bit of adjusting or managing. But it does take conscious engagement.
I do, before I coach, before I show, before I do my automatic writing in the morning, a process that we teach is create a sacred bubble or vessel. Is there something that you could suggest that people, or a technique people could use to create their own little energy field that they can stay within?
Mm-hmm. Whatever visualization works for you, a bubble, a sphere, a cocoon, I'm not attached to the shape.
Yeah.
But one of the concepts that helps me is if you're familiar with positive and negative air pressure. So I'm sure we've all walked into a building where you open the door and the door just flings open. That's because there's positive air pressure in the building where the air is moving outward. Or we've tried to open the door and we're like, because the pressure is going inward, and so you're working against that tension. So if you can visualize your bubble and then imagine positive air pressure, if you will, exuding out from your core, then that, and you can think of that as love that you're sending out, or compassion, or, whatever works for you. That also helps create this natural sort of boundary where things are going to deflect off of the edges.
Thank you. So going to the next one, our sensitivity to subtle energies and information, and how do we basically, I'm not sure if control is the right term, but we want to have some understanding so it's not overwhelming us at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the first thing is to recognize it happens. There's a lot of people that I've talked to who are like, what's happening to me? Why do I see these things? Why do I know that this is going to happen? So in the beginning, it's the scary thing. They don't understand it. Mm-hmm. So the first step is just acknowledging, yes, you're perceiving these things, and these are your particular gifts, whatever it is that you're perceiving. There is not an obligation to do something with that, because I know that's something that a lot of people worry about. It's like, okay, I know this information. I don't want to tell them, I'm not comfortable with it. And it's like, you don't have to. You got to figure out you first and how to manage that and how to live with that. And then you can decide if you want to turn that into a way of serving others with it. But what I also encourage people to do is talk to your spirit guides, talk to God, whoever your source is, and say, okay, can we turn the dial down a little bit? I'm getting overwhelmed. The stimulus is a little too much. Can we turn the dial down? A lot of times that will help in terms of the intensity or the frequency coming in. But it takes some time to learn to manage that and to not feel like you have to do something with every piece of information that comes in.
Well, that goes to a whole theme today, which is oxygen mask on ourselves, first and foremost. And that if you're empathic, I believe there's no such thing as going too far and taking care of yourself. You're just not going to hit that point.
Yes.
So let's go from there. Let's talk about the premium we place on peace and harmony, and particularly the early years of my marriage with Jessica. We had what we'll call eggshell syndrome, and we're still working our way back from that. What happened in your first marriage, and why weren't you able to speak your truth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was totally codependent in my first marriage. My first marriage was pretty much entirely inside my unconscious years. The last few years were, a part of my awakening. And I'll give one specific example that as our marriage was coming apart, we had a house for sale in Illinois. We had moved to Kansas City. We were living with his parents because we couldn't afford to be in a new house while we're still paying for the old house. My husband at the time was very frustrated because his life didn't look the way he thought it would look at that point, his job, where he was living, all of these things. And so I called it compassion. And, I recognize, it's like, okay, he's really upset and volatile. And so if I needed to talk about something, kind of emotional, or if I needed to bring up a decision we needed to make, I would do whatever I could to either not bring it to his attention, like handle it myself, or sort of milquetoast it down and buff off the edges to make it as palatable as possible, so it didn't have sharp, pointy edges or something that might incite him. And I called all of that compassion, when really it was totally just codependence, walking on eggshells, not having enough confidence, not having the ability to withstand whatever his reaction was going to be, and not take responsibility for his reaction, because that's what I was doing. instead of just going, I'm going to present this information, I'm going to ask this need, I need to talk about this thing, and however you respond, I couldn't handle that. I didn't even know how to handle that.
So, and that brings us to our next one, which is our big open hearts and a desire to serve others. How do we start to build healthy boundaries? And this is going to scare ourselves a little bit, isn't it?
Well, yes, it certainly can. It certainly can. Especially in the last few years, I've really become aware of the concept I call my energy bank account. And I think part of it too is when we're young, our recovery time is faster. We don't need as much sleep. We can eat something horrible and our system bounces back. We can abuse ourselves in this way and we think we're invincible. And so for me, I had some health issues and I just had to get really up close and personal with my limitations. And so the idea of this energetic bank account is, again, using a finite concept of, just like a bank account, you can either have a positive balance or a negative balance. And there's a Rumi quote that says, never, I'm not going to get it quite right, but never give from the depth of your well, but from the overflow.
Beautiful.
And if you have nothing in your bank account, then you have nothing to give. You are shorting the people that you're serving because you are not able to show up 100%. You're not able to be present. You're not able to be fully accessing your joy and your life force energy because you're completely depleted. And so this idea of self-care, so that we don't overgive, is really important. And it's a practice, but it's also a mindset as well, because so much of what our Western society would tell us that, we wear our exhaustion like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
And that paradigm needs to change.
So, and I want to dive into that in self-care in a second, but you just hit something that was really powerful. I think what you're saying to everybody listening today is you're giving people permission to let go of the guilt and use the most powerful 2-letter word in the universe, no.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Use your no. Yes. And in the book, I go through different levels of no and even examples for how to say no, because these examples I didn't even know were possible in my younger years.
Can you give us one idea of how to say no?
Yes. One of the things that I talk about, well, there's the no period, there's the no but, and then there's the yes no. And so I'll give an example of the yes no. The yes no is you said yes and you realized you really wanted to say no. And so sometimes you have to eat a little bit of crow, but it is okay to go back to somebody and say, listen, I need to apologize to you. You asked me to do this thing and I said yes. And what I realized is I can't do it. I can't do a good job because I don't have enough time, or I just didn't want to disappoint you. And so I said yes. You can say, I said yes, but I really, I'm not available, or, you wanted this much of my time. I only have this much. Will that work? Or can we do this thing instead of that thing? So a lot of times it comes with a suggestion for an alternative, when we say no. And I just want to throw in a really important tool in the whole no saying process.
Yeah.
And that is the pause. And that is a tool that I only learned really a few years ago. Because I would feel the weight, the expectation of what somebody else wanted from me so acutely that I just felt like I had to answer in the moment. And the idea of pausing wasn't even in my toolbox.
I like.
Go ahead.
Oh, I like that because I'm prone to do the reverse. To protect myself so much, my nervous system goes up, and I immediately go no, and then I have to pause. And so I've told my wife, I've said, no does not necessarily mean no. Give me a minute to run this through and see how it feels.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So let's go from there. Let's talk a little bit about self-care. This can be some of the fun stuff. And I'm thinking of my wife in the most loving terms of me wearing this sweatshirt that I'm keen to wear, a nice yellow fleece. And she will always, her hand will reach out and go for the zipper top or zipper pocket at the top because she has to zip it closed. You get this, don't you?
Oh, that's funny.
So I want to talk about our environment and the energy.
Yeah.
And you come home from spiritual workshop or program, and you're going through your house and you're zipping things and you're moving things around.
Yes.
Tell me more.
Yes. Well, working on myself has been a priority for many years, and I don't do spirituality light. I'm kind of an intensity junkie, and for people who play with astrology, I have 4 planets in Scorpio. So it's like, let's just dive in there and dig around in the shadow and the muck and all of that kind of stuff. And so I would go to these really transformational processes, and I would come home and walk through the front door, and I'd be like, well, this just won't do. Because my vibration had shifted so acutely in that short period of time that now my external and internal worlds are no longer in harmony. And so I'd rearrange this, or, sometimes it would be a whole, we're going to paint, we're going to, do something major. I practice in a Peruvian tradition of shamanism called the Pachacuti Mesa tradition, and we make use of an altar called a mesa. And the mesa really is just, again, another reflection of your internal self, kind of a control panel for your life, if you will. And so many times I've come home and I've had to completely rearrange my mesa because each of these sacred items is a medicine piece and holds a particular frequency, and that had to shift too.
And it's important. It's important to respect that and look at our environment, whether it's our car, whether it's our cubicle, whether it's our bedroom, whether it's our entire house, and say, this has an energy to it. What energy works for me? And to love myself enough to say, I'm going to make that a top priority.
Yes. And, it's your space. And especially if it's your home, do whatever you need to do. Who cares if it looks professional or appropriate or whatever, it's your space. Create it to support you.
What is, so you talked about the Pachacuti, and I want to double back to self-care because that's where we're going to finish up before we dive into a meditation. But it's a concept of world reversal. I want to know what that means and what is our own personal world reversal, because you're talking about making great change in a sense, though slowly, kindly, gently.
Yes. The creator of this tradition, his name is Oscar Mira Quesada. He came up with that name, Pachacuti, which means world reversal. And it really is just this shifting, this, you can think of it as moving from the unconscious years to the conscious years, or you can think of it as ascending or evolving. But that spiritual crucible that I spoke of, the shamanic death process, there's something has to die, a part of our ego structure, part of our psyche, a part of our set of values and beliefs in this world reversal. So it's happening on a global scale, it's happening on a personal scale again. So, as the one, so the circle, as the circle, so the one.
Beautiful. So let's go from there and let's talk a little bit more about self-care. What are some very simple, basic steps people can take today to start to refill the bank account?
Mm-hmm. So part of this is very individual in terms of what fills up the bank account for you. But in general, having time to just sit and be.
Windows and drooling.
Yeah, exactly. There are times when I know I just need to check out and not be responsible and not be productive and have output, and I call it my staring out the window and drooling time. So it's like the pause on steroids. Yeah. And for most people, nature is incredibly restorative. So, even like when I worked in the corporate world, even if I just stepped outside for 5 minutes and just connected with a tree or focused on the sound of the birds or the sound of the wind moving through the branches or a flower or something, or just to go stand on the grass instead of the concrete. Those little things make all of the difference. Other practices include just what we talked about earlier, saying no, drawing boundaries and asking for what you need are huge self-care pieces. But there's also this nurturing piece. There's a piece of letting your creativity flow. So dancing and singing and creating, those things are incredible self-care pieces. But giving yourself the time that you need to do what feeds you. And so I'm gonna give a very powerful question that listeners can ask themselves in figuring out this energy bank account thing and self-care, and that is, does this feed me or does this drain me? And if you look at the major components in your life and most of them peg the drain me meter, then you need more feed me, and draining doesn't necessarily mean you have to get rid of it. Like, I'll just give a personal example. I'm in a huge output cycle right now in the marketing and promotion of my book, highly masculine output productivity. That doesn't mean it's bad, but it drains me. It's going to drain anybody. I feel like I'm birthing a baby every other day, So I have to be vigilant in my self-care. I've got to do things in the feed me column. Otherwise, I won't have the energy to sustain all of this output.
Are you going to go from things like this and go, I don't know, smudge, sage, and literally put yourself in an Epsom salt bath?
I will probably sage, but there are different things that are meaningful to me. Like, I ride horses, and for me, that's soul food.
And talk about an empathic individual. A horse, to me, is the most sensitive, understands our energy, and it means it helps put you in a sacred space, and the horse will also demand that of you as well.
Yeah, that's a whole different conversation. But yes, yeah, they're amazing creatures.
Very, very cool. What advice would you give to parents to help a child if they have a child who's very empathic?
Guess what? You're going to have to work on yourself. Because you can't help your children if you stonewall them. If you're so rigid, these children coming in are their energetic physiology is different. And yes, we laugh and make jokes about the different generations and all of that kind of stuff, and how as we get older, oh my God, I sound like my parents. But there's going to take some mindset shifting and some educating of yourself to understand that this phenomenon, if you will, it's a real thing. Empaths are a real thing. These sensitivities are real. You're not just raising children that are weak or wimpy or pansies or entitled or whatever. They come here with some amazing gifts, but it's gonna challenge parents to have to look at their parenting in a totally different way and come up with new tools for supporting their children.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So that segues perfectly to where can people go to find your beautiful book. We'll call this a handbook for empaths, or as my wife calls it, the handbook for the Pookie. And she wants me to read this over and over and over and over again.
My website is bluestartemple.org. The book hits shelves November 5th, so it's available for pre-order, and on November 5th you can go to your favorite bookseller in store or on their website. And while you're on my website, you can download a free copy of the Evolutionary Empath Activation Manual and check out my products. I have a lot of products I'm hoping to get on next year, but right now I've got a video home study program called The Art and Practice of Energetic Clearing. I have an embodiment manual that I'm getting ready to put up. I have meditations that you can purchase. So the goal is to have a lot of support tools for sensitive souls.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. If you didn't catch bluestartemple.org, come on over to inspirenationshow.com. We'll get you over to bluestartemple.org. This has been truly phenomenal, and I am so glad we had you on the show, and I am so glad that I've dove into this book. I'm on 1.5 of my reading, and I get to keep going through it and through it and through it again. I will be doing my homework. Any last words of wisdom you want to share with people before we dive into a meditation?
I just want to remind everybody that, the first half of the book is the cosmic perspective. It's the overview, it's the context. That's one of the gifts that I feel that I bring. And I really want empaths to understand that you're here on purpose. You're not crazy. You're not a random event. There's not something wrong with you. You have a bigger cosmic mission. And I know when I got that in my bones, that really helped me, especially on the hard days, to motivate me, to give me inspiration. And so I want empaths to know that.
Awesome, awesome. And I'm going to add a tiniest little addendum, and you can add to my addendum if you want. But this does not mean be a martyr, anything but that.
Yes, and thank you for that clarity. And it doesn't mean that you have to become a public figure or write a book or start a movement. Just be you where you are. That's what's important to know about that too.
Woohoo! Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, would you mind, Stephanie? This has been truly phenomenal, and I can't, from the bottom of my heart and from the bottom of Jessica's heart, I can't thank you enough. This is so important because, I'm one way down the spectrum of empath. She's a whole nother level, and she's 10 years younger than me. The newer generations are coming in even more sensitive. This is so incredibly important, so I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
So would you mind leading us in a meditation?
I would be happy to. And I'm going to offer, this is a meditation that I use in almost all of my empath workshops. Mm-hmm. It is a tool to tune into your energetic container and to play with a little bit so that you can use that as a tool for protection, if you will, when you're out in public or, moving through your daily life.
Excellent. If you're driving, I'll pause it. If we're driving down the road, let's do this when you get home and have a nice, quiet place. Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay. So I invite you to take a comfortable seat, taking a couple of deep, clearing breaths, close your eyes, and call in your spiritual team, your guides and helpers to surround you and witness you. And just take a moment to connect your roots into the earth and connecting your crown to the universe, to the great all that is, knowing that you are the alchemical, magical instrument that combines both heaven and earth. You are both and. Just breathe into your heart space. And imagine now your energetic container, your bubble, your cocoon, whatever shape that is for you. And if you're not a visual person, that's totally fine. Imagine it, sense it, allow your energetic container to communicate with you where its edges are in whatever way works best for you. And right now, don't move it or tend to it. Just notice it. And I want you to look on all sides. So what does it look like? How far away is it from you? What is the makeup of the edges above you, below you, in front of you, and behind you, to the left and to the right? And so just notice its qualities, whatever information it's sharing with you on its shape and structure, its integrity. And we're going to move the edges. We're going to do this a couple of times so that you can begin to play with this tool and get a feel for how it feels different when your boundaries are at different distances from your body. And so you can use either your in-breath or your out-breath, whatever is most natural. But I would invite you to start consciously breathing. And with each breath, expand the edges of your container. And for this particular iteration, we're just going to go to the size of the room that you're in. So with each breath, expand your container a little further, making sure that it's moving out equally in all directions, above, below, front and back, left and right. And when you get to the size of the room that you're in, just pause there and again call up your inner observer and notice. What is there to notice? What is different when your boundaries are that distance from your body? Does it feel more expansive or is it frightening? Check in with the content, the structure, the integrity. Did it stay the same? Did it thin out? Did some holes develop? Did it get thicker? Just again, noticing what there is to notice. How do you feel when your edges are at this distance? And now use the opposite breath to slowly bring your edges back in. And this time, you may or may not land with your edges the same distance as they were before. I want you to very specifically choose what I would call your comfortable daily operating distance. Bring your field back. It's a distance where you feel comfortably contained, not claustrophobic, not too big, not too small, where your container, the edges are intact, solid, and in integrity. And just notice, what distance is that for you? And how does that feel? It should feel safe, comfortable, contained, solid, secure, confident. Very good. And now we're going to expand one more time. And this time I want you to go about the size of a city block. So again, choosing either the in-breath or out-breath, begin to expand your container once again, moving at a pace that's comfortable for you and observing the process. You might want to move at a little bit faster pace than the last time, covering a little more distance with each breath. And when your energy container is now the size of a city block, pause there and notice. What is the structure of your energy container? How did it change? What is different? How do you feel when your field is that far out, when the edges are that far out and your field is that large? Do you feel lost or do you feel adventurous? Are you overwhelmed with stimulus or do you feel like you're more floating above things? There's no right or wrong answer. Just notice what is true for you. And letting your inner observer take those notes. And then complete with that exercise using the alternative breath to bring your field back into that comfortable, safe, daily operating distance. Again, noticing the difference. And this is a tool that you can use to build awareness of your edges, your boundaries, and it's also a tool that you can use to protect yourself, as when we're out in public or with larger groups or where there's a lot of stimulation, most people feel more comfortable drawing their field up a little bit tighter to their body. So use this tool however it serves you. And take a nice deep breath to clear the experiences and return to neutral. And gently open your eyes. And we are complete.
Wow. 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 That was
So how was that
cool.
for you? Yeah, I'm curious your experience.
So a few things that I learned. One, as I expanded my field in a short distance, because of everything that I have around me, the green screen and everything, I wasn't comfortable expanding it. And I'm going, what can I do? This is again part of our theme at the home. What can I do to change my environment to allow myself to have that energetic space? And I'm thinking of the Pookie, who needs that even more than I do. But then as I went expansive and we're out surrounded by nature all around us, and I went out a city block, that felt good. And there was actually a very interesting paradox between in the home, I wanted to keep it close, maybe arm's width or so. But as soon as I went outside and expansive, how much freer that felt. And then when I came back into myself, I found, or into my space, I felt like I was putting on a tight jacket. And so the question becomes, how can I have my internal environment feel like I am allowed to expand my energy more as I'm doing outside? That was my
Beautiful.
take.
Yeah, yeah. That's awesome. And I find that it's not, the experience is not the same from one person to the next. Some people feel better with their field out there and big, and some people feel better with it right here. It just depends.
And I describe my wife as a kitty cat. We have 3 little kitty cats. We have my wife as a kitty cat. And I know that if I expand my field too much, I interfere with the kitty cats. And so I have to balance my energy with those around me, because I do like putting out big energy. That's why I'm speaking on this show. And I have to watch and mitigate that energy so that it is not, in my wife's words, barfing over anybody else, specifically her.
Yes. And I totally get that, because in my unconscious years, I'm a big energy too. And I would just expand to whatever space was provided. And if you're going to retreat, I'll just expand into your space, So I really had to learn to contain myself.
So I'm getting more. I've gotten more than I bargained for today. I cannot thank you enough, Stephanie. This is awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Very grateful.
And it goes both ways. So I got to crank up. Now I've got to crank my energy up. We'll put it out there again. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get the evolutionary empath, and begin owning your special gifts today and shine bright. Woohoo! Awesome, 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 Stephanie. We did it. An early morning as well.
I know. It was so wonderful to meet you and spend time with you. Thank you for what you do in the world.
I just had the most beautiful interview with Reverend Stephanie Redfeather, PhD, on the evolutionary empath. To check out more videos on how to be your incredible self, click here, subscribe below.